ye mountains high, where the clear blue sky arches over the vales of the free, where the pure breezes blow and the clear streamlets flow, how I've longed to your bosom to flee. O Zion, dear Zion, land of the free.
This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of DefendingUtah.org, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Don't forget to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. You can also find us on Spreaker, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. Welcome back to the Liberty Lineup. This is The Naked Truth. Every Thursday from 10 to noon on K-Talk AM 630. This is Ben McClintock from DefendingUtah.org, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. This is The Naked Truth. This is what we need, is to think right and wrong, not right and left.
Thinking would be a start.
Thinking would be a start. And
rub some synapses together and try to get a spark or something.
We hope everybody will go to our YouTube channel, Defending Utah. Just go to youtube.com, search for Defending Utah, and check out our reports. Subscribe to our channel, get all the updates that we have there. We've been speaking with Garrett Smith, an attorney here in the state of Utah, also a regular on the Liberty Lineup radio show. He spoke last week at the Liberty Rising event and about constitutional sheriffs, and we said we needed to have Garrett on. Thanks for joining us, Garrett.
Glad to be with you.
So we were talking about there was the meeting at the Capitol earlier in the year in March about HB 276, the bill that takes away power from the sheriff, and they were just kind of freaking out about the opposition they were getting. And this guy named Mark Ward, who's an attorney for the Utah Association of Counties, and he had some statements to make about daring to question the state. We'll play that.
There has to be a DLM. If there's no DLM, if there's no management structure, what do you have? You have chaos. You have anarchy. You have the absence of law, which is the most un-American thing there is. You have to have a structure, and that structure has to revolve around the sovereign state of Utah. If you leave it to just what? The people? You've got to place the ownership of those lands.
Just leave it to the people? Shocking. How could you just leave it to the people?
That guy is such a conspirator. What a loser. You know he's trying to steal it for himself. What did the ranchers do before the BLM? They had fence lines. They had water rights. They had split estate property ownership. They had contracts. And they prospered.
Exactly.
But we can't have any prosperity, see, because the end game is for us to be dependent on the state. Like Venezuela.
Like Venezuela. So, Garrett, people are really hot on this issue of the constitutional sheriffs. They've got a lot of different views. I wanted to play this clip from Sheriff Jim Tracey from Utah County and what he says about the constitutional sheriff versus what he signed the contract with the Constitutional Police Officers Association.
Let me, Sheriff Tracey, Utah County. Going back to the statement that Mark Ward made, that's part of the dilemma, and that's part of the issue, that's part of the clarification that we have as sheriffs and understand. States are sovereign. Counties are not sovereign. Counties are political subdivisions of the state. My authority as sheriff comes from that document right there. It's under Utah Code annotated. There's nothing in this document, the Constitution of the United States, that talks about the office of sheriff. There's nothing in the state of Utah's Constitution that talks about the county sheriff. The county sheriff is an animal, a construct of the legislators of Utah under Title 17, Utah Code Annotated, Chapter 22. It could be ripped in half and null and void tomorrow by legislative action. So where do I get my authority? This is one of the things that I have talked to Sam about before and others, even Richie Mack. When it comes to what I can and can't do, I can't assume unto myself just what I want to do. Then I become the king. I become the tyrant.
Okay, right there. I know we're getting to a break in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to make sure and get to right there. He already just gave the key points of his argument. Is one, he says that there's no such thing as a sheriff in the Constitution, that he gets his power from the legislature, and then he sets up a straw man that if he defends the Constitution, then he's the tyrant of Utah County, as if people were saying that we wanted him to be able to do whatever he wanted. That's what is what we were calling for with the constitutional sheriff, and that's not what people are calling for. Garrett?
Absolutely. A constitutional sheriff is someone who will uphold the Constitution. And this is the Constitution and as it's been amended. So this isn't even talking about U.S. code. It is the Constitution.
Right.
And for him to say that, a sheriff is a law unto himself, that's just a misunderstanding of separation and division of powers. The sheriff is an executive office. It's checked on the county level by legislative and judicial branches of the county government, but it's also checked by the state and federal governments as a whole. And that's that division of powers. So what we're seeing right now, sheriffs are violating the Constitution. Or, we're not seeing that sheriffs are violating the Constitution. It's the federal and state governments that are violating the Constitution, and the sheriff has the ability and a duty to stand up, to nullify, and to protect the people that they, that elect them into office.
Right.
That's what's mean by keeping their oath of office. And for him to say that a sheriff will be a tyrant, that's an absolute lie. They are the closest to the people, and they can be put out of office. The further the government gets away from the people, the more tyrannical it becomes.
Right.
Why didn't some genius in the audience ask him where the IRS was in the Constitution? Or his buddies at the ATF, or the EPA, or the FBI, since the FBI definitely supersedes his authority? Because the people vote for the FBI.
and there was another question I wanted to ask him because, as far as I can see through the research I've done, the Title 17, Chapter 22 that he references in the Utah Code wasn't enacted until 1953. So I was going to ask, well, were there no sheriffs in Utah before the state of Utah codified that law? Well, of course not. The office of the sheriff was a pre-political office defined by common law long before Utah even became a state, and certainly long before the Utah legislature enacted Title 17. So for him to say that he gets his power is one of those arguments. It's the same one that, is it Mark Ward, the guy that spoke before?
Yeah.
It's like saying that the government gives us the permission to get married.
Right.
That was that Defense of Marriage Act. They're like, oh, we're going to define marriage between a man and a woman. Well, the government isn't in that definition. And because they did that and they became the federal government stepped into the realm of marriage, now we have gay marriage, coming down from the courts. But if we never let that legislation pass in the first place and we just went on natural common law, then they wouldn't be able to take it away. But because they said, well, we defined it, and we gave the sheriff, for example, in this situation, we gave the sheriffs this power, we can also take it away. And that's simply not the case.
Exactly. We are speaking with Garrett Smith, attorney here in the state of Utah. I am Ben McClintock of defendingutah.org, joined this week with Jared. And we are talking about constitutional sheriffs and how in Utah we're having a hard time, even though they talk a good talk and they claim to be constitutional. They're saying and doing something completely different. Let's compare actions and to words. More back when we come back from the break. Hello, you are back on K-Talk AM 630. This is Ben McClintock of defendingutah.org. We've got Jared joining us this week. Again, we want to help you, invite you to subscribe to Defending Utah's YouTube channel. Look at all of our different interviews, our productions, and different things that we've been able to put out there to get yourself fully informed so that you can take effective action. And we have on the line with us Garrett Smith, attorney here in the state of Utah, talking about the Office of Constitutional Sheriff. We have the CEO here in Salt Lake County who calls himself a sheriff, but he's really the chief executive officer of a private mercenary organization. But then we have...
And if you dig deep enough, he's probably a UN employee.
He might be. But Then we've got other people that claim to be constitutional sheriffs. They'll sign Sheriff Mack's documents saying that they're constitutional sheriffs. And then, like Sheriff Jim Tracey, I'm going to play the clip again, comes and says that there's no such thing as a constitutional sheriff.
Sheriff Tracey, Utah County. Going back to the statement that Mark Ward made, that's part of the dilemma, and that's part of the issue, that's part of the clarification that we have as sheriffs and understand. States are sovereign. Counties are not sovereign. Counties are political subdivisions of the state. My authority as sheriff comes from that document.
He just made that up.
It's under Utah Code annotated. There's nothing in this document, the Constitution of the United States, that talks about the office of sheriff.
So he's saying that there's no such thing as a constitutional sheriff because sheriff isn't in the Constitution, and that I, as sheriff, get my authority from the state legislature, even though, like you said before the break, Garrett, that the office of sheriff existed before the state legislature recognized it as an official entity.
And so what he's misunderstanding, he says that, the state is sovereign. And, they have powers, they have jurisdiction, but I thought it was part of just the idea of the Constitution, the American experience, that the people really are sovereign. It's, it's not the government.
Right.
They derive their powers from the consent of the governed. So, this is the U.S. Constitution. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So that's the U.S. Constitution. The Utah Constitution says all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority for their equal protection and benefit, and they have the right to alter or reform their government as the public welfare may require. So Mark Ward, Sheriff Tracey, when they keep saying that Utah or the state is the absolute authority, the state is sovereign, not the political subdivisions, not the federal government. They're just basically trying to bolster the power of the state when in reality, even our state constitution says the power is inherent in the people.
And the people elect the sheriff.
Right, and the sheriff is the closest that you can get to the people with an elective office that's acting as a chief law enforcement officer, as an executive. It is the very closest you can get to the people and preserving the interests of the people in upholding the Constitution.
So it's essential that our listeners understand that just because their sheriff might have said that they're a constitutional sheriff doesn't mean that they actually believe it, just like Jim Tracey did from Utah County, signs the documents claiming to be a constitutional sheriff, and then when he's called on it and when these things come up to his attention and he's forced to actually address it head on, he says that it doesn't exist and that he gets his power from the state. So
either there's two possibilities. Either he is misinformed or he's lying. So you have to take that into account, and if you can educate, and if the listeners were able to call their sheriffs to say, I would like to meet with you, mm-hmm. and they present basically the common law and educate on that, and if the sheriff is willing to change and become a constitutional sheriff in not just title but in how they perform their duties, then sure, keep them in. Right. But if we find out that, hey, they're just lying, they're trying to bolster the power of the state, take away the rights of the people, say that they're forced to implement federal and state laws because they get their power from the state, then they need to be removed. Right. And that's the thing is people need to understand. I think a great point that our listeners need to bring up when they talk to their sheriff, if their sheriff repeats to them, or if their sheriff is Jim Tracey and talks to them about how they get their power from the sheriff, a thing to ask them would be, well, where did they get their power before the state legislature came up with that code?
At that point, they would take a commercial break, and you'd never see them again.
Or they would just talk over you. It was interesting watching that video, and every time there was someone who was, like Scott Bradley, he speaks at the end, and every time he's making a great point, they just jump all over, and they don't want him to speak.
Right.
It's just interesting how it works. But here's the thing. We don't understand common law today. when you look at even the Supreme Court decisions, if you go to the United States Supreme Court, it wasn't until 1970 that the federal government started trying to impose their will and their agenda through the sheriffs.
Right.
It wasn't even an option because people understood that the sheriffs have power to nullify, and as part of upholding their oath of office, they have to interpose themselves between themselves and unconstitutional laws.
Right.
So it wasn't even an option. And if I can, there's a quote from the Wisconsin Supreme Court back in 1870. So we're looking, not quite 100 years after adopting the Constitution, but even after the Civil War, it was understood that the sheriff was a common law office, and the powers and authority of the sheriff was understood by the people. So here's the quote. It's from Kennedy versus Brunst, Wisconsin Supreme Court. Now it is quite true that the Constitution nowhere defines what powers, rights, and duties shall attach or belong to the office of sheriff, but there can be no doubt that the framers of the Constitution had reference to the office with those generally recognized legal duties and functions belonging to it in this country and in the territory when the Constitution was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
It was well understood. The sheriff was not a contested position. The sheriff at common law was the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and this dates back to 500 AD in England, where the office of the sheriff was first established. And even though it wasn't written into the Constitution, there's a treatise written where Walter Anderson says that everyone clearly understood the duties, responsibilities, and authorities of sheriffs. Therefore, it was not necessary to include a lengthy enumeration of their duties in the Constitution. So what's happening is because the people have become less educated, even though we think we're more educated, and they say that some of the founders had whatever grade education.
Right.
We are so uneducated, and we don't understand it, and so people in political offices, in my profession, a lot of law school professors, judges, attorneys, they are advocating that the sheriff is no longer the chief law enforcement officer with no basis in common law or in statute.
And so they're claiming that the district attorney or the attorney general is the chief law enforcement, which is a complete violation of separation of powers.
Absolutely. So the Attorney General of the United States originally, under the Constitution, was named as the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, but his duties were far different from what we see today.
Right.
What we see today is a person who spends all their time in the courtroom in the judicial branch. So they're actually not enforcing the law and out protecting the people. That's not what they do. They are adjudicators. And so to say that an adjudicator is also the chief law enforcement officer, which is an executive role, would be a violation of separation of powers in and of itself.
Just might as well make him the judge, jury, and executioner.
Right. They might as well write the laws, too, and just combine all three branches.
Right.
And that's where the bureaucrat is formed.
That'd be so much more efficient, wouldn't it? We wouldn't want to have government waste.
Well, and that's what we see. We see that there are so many violations of separations of powers where, the executive will just do an executive order, which is basically legislation.
Right.
The same thing. The judges will legislate from the bench. Congress is kind of, basically the front man. They just want to say, hey, well, we're going to go and change all these things, and then they abdicate all their powers and still fund things which we have no money to fund. So it's
or authorization to fund, even if we had the cash.
Absolutely. So what we need is a check. We need a check by constitutional sheriffs who swear to uphold the Constitution, as all these other politicians do, but they don't.
Right.
They swear to do it, but they don't. We need constitutional sheriffs who will not only swear to do it with their oath of office, but will stand up and perform their duties.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to be like ancient Rome, where the emperor puts his horse in his chief counsel, right? Because just showing how ineffective that the that the legislature really is. So what about the comment of Sheriff Tracey that he would just be the dictator if he were to actually stand up for the Constitution and arrest federal agents or state agents that were violating the rights of the people?
Well, the title in and of itself, Chief Law Enforcement Officer, there's a lot of jurisdictions that can meet all together. When I was trying to even do some research, even online, Google is very slanted, and they're only giving half-truths. And it's just interesting to even try and find any of the research because they're burying it even through our research engine, through the Internet. They're controlling that information. But it says, there was one attorney who talks about who would have the final say, and he's like, well, police have jurisdiction in a city, sheriffs over a county, a ranger over a state, and a marshal, a federal officer. Mm-hmm. But when you put all of these officials together, the only one that holds the title Chief Law Enforcement Officer is the sheriff. Right. So when it comes down to people fighting over jurisdiction, whoever is the chief law enforcement officer has the ultimate say. So if people, you say FBI, BLM, people that are acting within the federal government, people think federal trumps. Not so. The chief law enforcement officer of every jurisdiction within the United States is a sheriff, and they are, if the federal agencies are not upholding the Constitution, for example, the BLM occupying territory that under the Constitution they have no right to occupy and own, then the sheriff has the right and the duty to stand between the BLM and the people.
Garrett, what do states that have gotten rid of the institution of sheriff need to do to get it back?
So, great question. So within that same treatise that I was mentioning earlier, just the conclusion of this researcher who pulled all the information together, he says any attempt to minimize the office of the sheriff's responsibilities without a lawful constitutional amendment is unconstitutional and thus null and void from the time that the alleged change was done. The sheriff is still the chief executive officer and highest peace officer in his or her county. The sheriff works directly for the citizens of the county. So if you have a legislative body that is trying to, legislate a sheriff out of their duties, it has to be by amendment to the Constitution because it is so ingrained in the common law and of the states that supports, this whole nation. Our nation is relatively young. Sheriff has been around since 500 A.D. And you can't
get off to
get
a hard
rid of the
break,
common
Garrett.
law.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much, Garrett Smith, attorney at law here in the state of Utah. How can they contact you?
You can reach me if you have further questions by email. It's faithfamilyfreedom@outlook.com. No capitals, no periods.
Great.
Just straight faithfamilyfreedom@outlook.com.
Thanks, Garrett. This has been Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of defendingutah.org. Make sure to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. And also, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Gordon's Carpet Cleaning. If you want the job done right, call Gordon's Carpet Cleaning, 801-368-0140. That's 801-368-0140. We also want to let you know about the Editor Lady. She will help you publish your book or do any editing for a price you won't believe. Give the Editor Lady a call at 801-948-3667. That's 801-948-3667. Or email her at theeditorlady@gmail.com. We all know that we need to get prepared for job loss, disasters, and just plain life. You need to go to emergencyseedbank.com. That's emergencyseedbank.com. Enter coupon code DEFEND.UT to get your deep discount on Urban Emergency Seed Bank of 23 varieties of non-hybrid, non-GMO seeds, double hermetically sealed in Mylar for seeds that last for decades. emergencyseedbank.com. Coupon code DEFEND.UT.